Hey everyone, this is Devon Joshi. I'm the web administrator for the Johnsonian, and welcome to another segment of Tech Tips. This week, our tech tip is courtesy of David Thackham. He asked the question, "What is Linux?" Well, Linux is generally used as a very broad term in everyday conversation, when in fact it's a very specific thing. Linux is an operating system, or any operating system, that is based off of the Linux kernel. And what's a kernel is the basic component of any operating system. It's the lowest part of the operating system that interacts with the hardware, and then the rest of the operating system builds upon it. So the kernel is talking to the hardware, and then the rest of the operating system, um, carries other functions, the file systems, the interface for the user. So that's what Linux is, and there's many different variations of Linux. In fact, you'd be surprised with one very, very, very popular version of Linux that you might not know is Linux, and that's the Mac OS system. So Mac OS is a Linux-based system, and there's a really simple way to check if you don't believe me. If you're on a Mac right now, go to your Finder, which is up here, the little magnifying glass finder, and type in terminal. And then you'll get something. Now, it's not going to say this, but it'll say something on the order of that. And you'll get a little blinking line, and type the command ls and hit enter. And you should get a list of folders. In this case, I have my desktop, my documents, Dropbox downloads. Okay, the ls command is a list command in Linux. And uh, if you're able to successfully execute it, well, there you go. You have a Linux system. Now, I mean, I understand that's a pretty low level way of checking, but if you research Mac OS, the system it's using underlying is actually a version of BSD, which stands for the Berkeley Standard Distribution of Linux. So that's the Mac OS is one of our very popular versions of the Linux operating system. There's tons of other ones. I'm using one of the most popular Linux distributions I think out there, and that would be Ubuntu, specifically Ubuntu 10.10 is what I'm using here. But there's many others: Red Hat, Fedora, the Kubuntus, which are all I consider all those Ubuntu's with different desktop environments. That's getting a little sidetracked, but they're all out there for you. There's tons and tons and tons. Why use Linux? Why don't you get computers that come with Linux pre-installed? And actually, I think now that's going to be changing in a little bit. But for the main thing, the reason you don't see it is because Linux is free. It's free. It's open source, which means that anyone can go in and modify the code and give it back to the community, build upon it. So the Linux kernel has evolved, and it will continue to evolve as people find new modifications for it. Uh, and the same goes with all these distributions, which is why it's free. Whereas Windows and Mac, those are proprietary. Microsoft and Apple don't want you to experiment. They lock down their code, and that's why they sell it to you, because it's a proprietary thing. They're the only ones to make modifications and distribute it, whereas Linux is open source and it's very much community based. Um, are there advantages and disadvantages to Linux versus Windows or Mac? Of course there are. Understanding that, you have an open source environment versus companies whose entire job is to make a end user product. Linux is still surprisingly doing very well. I think the easiest problems to really define might be with drivers, but the interesting thing is, as this community grows, as the Linux community grows, I've had better results finding drivers with Linux than I have with distributions like Windows XP, Vista, or Windows 7. It's just because the community supports such an infinitely broad range of hardware. Um, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm not going to talk really about Mac, just because Mac OS, when it's designed, is designed for hardware, specifically designed by Apple. Um, that's why you have an EFI boot. That's why you can't install a Mac OS on an AMD computer, because it's designed differently. But Windows is designed to be on AMD or Intel or any other processor that you can find, they'll support it. I'm just going to say AMD and Intel, 64 or 32-bit. Um, but you'll notice that Windows 7 generally has better luck installing on somewhat newer machines, whereas Windows XP has better luck installing on somewhat older machines. Um, Not to say that you couldn't install Windows XP on a newer machine, but you'll find interesting problems, whereas these Linux distributions like 10.10 that we have right here has really, really good support. I've rarely, in fact, never. I'm actually looking at this old compact that I got donated to me by a friend, and this thing is ancient, and no problems whatsoever with hardware. I put the Linux disk in, and there we had pickup immediately. So that's kind of incredible. Why use Linux? Well, kind of already hinted to the fact that if you're running slimmed down hardware, if you have an older computer that you need to use, Linux is a great alternative just to bring it back to life. It's pretty much full powered. You can do anything you can do in Windows or Mac, just about, with the exception of a few things. If you need something Windows or Mac specific, it can be a pain. iTunes won't work. Office Suite won't work. There are ways to work around it, but it's not going to work normally. It's no such thing as you download the installer and install it. The alternatives to it, well, for the iTunes, there really is no alternative, because if you're just using a music player, you're probably not going to get iTunes, you're going to get something else, but you get iTunes specifically because you have an Apple device. But if you're doing, if you need the Office Suite, there is OpenOffice right here. That will work fine with 10.10 or any Linux distribution like this. So that's one example of some things that won't work. Sometimes gaming. Gaming in Linux is a really weird thing. I don't game in Linux, so you'd have to look up some experts, or maybe if someone's watching this video and they game, shoot me an email and I can talk more about it, or you can post a reply video. That'd be great. I use it primarily for coding, so to write computer programs, to also use it for video and audio compression and switching file formats. I really love it for that. Whenever I make these videos, or I help out our multimedia editors, sometimes we get files, huge DV files that are maybe a gig and a half, and you want to upload that to YouTube. No way. I mean, the file size is so large, it'd be such a pain in the butt. But what I can do is put it into Linux and use a program such as WinFF, which will basically format anything to you want. I can format it into Flash, so a high definition video into a lossless Flash just about, and I can upload that to YouTube and get HD quality 1080 or at least 720 to 1080 on the YouTube end. So it's really great for that. To show off the graphics power, because Linux does not really require much from the hardware, you're able to do really cool virtual effects like this. This is called the Desktop Cube. It's from a package called the Compiz Config. And this is the Expo mode, so if you're on a Mac, you're familiar with this, but I've just expanded it out. This means I have 16 virtual desktops or 4 cubes, depending on how you look at it. And I can be running multiple things. One of my favorite things to do to show people is to run 16 different videos at once on Expo, and put it on a projector or just show someone, and you'll notice that there won't be much video lag outside of the buffering that is dependent on internet speed. So that's really fun. And then you can just, you can go for days. It's so easy to customize. Again, everything is free. Let me just show you around. I have this called the Cairo Dock, which is very much like a Mac launcher. If you want to, I think it's very popular, the Mac style launcher. To have it to the side, I have a theme on here. Yeah, Linux is great. Some really good things about Linux too, other than of course its speed, the fact that it's free, is that it doesn't get fragmented. Linux avoids fragmentation, which is really neat. The way the file system is structured avoids it, so that's good. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We can go into specific elements about Linux all day long. This is just a very brief overview, but again, to re-answer your question, David, what is Linux? Linux is any operating system that uses the Linux kernel. Okay, so it's not just one operating system, there's all sorts of derivations of it, but if they use the Linux kernel, they're Linux. Alright, so if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me at joshied@mytjnow.com. Definitely let me know, give me some responses, ask me questions you want answered, whatever you need, we can do it. And if you ever have anything else to add, I'm right here for you. Next video, I'm thinking, probably going to be about the amazing, wonderful Dropbox. So if you haven't heard about it, look forward to it. If you have, you'll really enjoy it again, because you really like Dropbox. Thanks for watching, guys.